The flashing blue and red strobes painted the manicured lawns of Oakwood Estates in an urgent, fragmented light. Rain, a persistent drizzle all morning, had just let up, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and expensive petunias. I pulled my department-issued sedan behind a line of unmarked vehicles, the yellow tape a stark, almost absurd contrast against the manicured hedges of what could only be described as a palatial estate. Another high-profile death. Another world of wealth colliding with a grim reality. I was Grant Marcus, and my arrival usually meant the initial chaos had subsided, giving way to the methodical, grim work. My role was to peel back the layers of flesh, bone, and circumstance to find the truth hidden beneath. The scene ahead, the home of tech titan Julian Thorne, promised to be a tangled knot. A uniformed officer, young and visibly uncomfortable, nodded me through the perimeter. The air inside the gates felt different, thick with unspoken questions. I spotted the lead detective, a grizzled veteran named Miller, by the front door, talking into his radio, his breath pluming faintly in the cool morning air. He looked tired, his face etched with the kind of weariness that comes from too many early calls and too many senseless endings. I geared up, the sterile latex gloves pulling taut over my hands, the blue booties a temporary, flimsy barrier against the world I was about to enter. The mask felt heavy, hot against my face, but it was a necessary shield, both physical and psychological. This was the ritual, the transition from the outside world into the sacred, profane space of a death. "Marcus," Miller grunted, lowering his radio. "Glad you're here. This one's a mess." "What are we looking at, Detective?" My voice was muffled by the mask, calm as always. Thorne. Julian Thorne. He was found by his cleaner this morning. Looks like a robbery gone bad, maybe a domestic. Wife's been notified. She's on her way back from a charity event out of state. Didn't even know he was dead until our call. Miller gestured towards the ornate mahogany double doors. Entry point was a rear patio door, forced. Place is ransacked, or appears to be. Safes in the master suite were pried open. Classic, really. I absorbed his words, but my eyes were already scanning, taking in the scene not as a narrative, but as a collection of data points. The forced entry, the ransacked rooms. These were the broad strokes. My job was the fine print. The foyer was a cavern of marble and polished dark wood, a grand staircase sweeping upwards. Even in the gloom, the wealth was palpable. An original oil painting on one wall, a museum-quality sculpture on a pedestal. But the pristine order was fractured. A ceramic vase lay shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered like discarded teeth. A Persian rug was rucked up, revealing a scuff mark on the marble beneath. I moved deeper, past a formal dining room where chairs had been overturned, past a kitchen with cabinet doors flung open, their contents spilling onto the granite counters. It was a performance of chaos, designed to convey desperation and haste. But something about the disarray felt rehearsed. The way a crystal decanter lay precisely on its side, unbroken, beside a pool of spilled liquor. The way a drawer was pulled completely out of a cabinet, its contents strewn. Yet a small, framed photograph of Thorne and a woman remained untouched, perfectly centered on a nearby shelf. The air grew heavy with the coppery tang of old blood as I approached the living room. Crime scene photographers were still at work, their flashes illuminating the macabre tableau. The lead investigator, a meticulous individual named Roberts, looked up from a laptop, nodding a greeting. Julian Thorne lay sprawled across a plush, cream-colored rug, a study in violent stillness. His expensive silk dressing gown was soaked dark, clinging to his broad frame. A heavy, ornate bronze letter opener, stained and glinting dully, lay near his outstretched hand. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared up at the vaulted ceiling, reflecting the sporadic camera flashes. "Single stab wound to the chest, Grant," Roberts stated, his voice low. "Looks like a struggle. Defensive wounds on the hands, some bruising on the arms. Post-mortem lividity suggests he's been gone for at least 8 to 10 hours. I knelt, my gaze sweeping over the scene. The room itself was opulent, a testament to Thorne's success. Bespoke leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with first editions, a large plasma screen television dominating one wall. The struggle Roberts mentioned was evident. A side table had been knocked over, spilling a cascade of magazines and remote controls. A heavy armchair was askew, its cushion half off. My eyes fixated on Thorne's right hand, specifically the fingernails. Beneath one, a minute fleck of what looked like dried paint, a vibrant cerulean barely visible. It didn't match anything in the immediate vicinity. The walls were cream, the furniture muted tones. No art in this room featured that specific shade. An anomaly. Then I noticed the other detail. On a small, antique writing desk in the corner, amidst a scattered pile of business cards and a half-empty coffee mug, lay a single, crisp, folded document. It wasn't thrown or scattered like everything else. It was placed almost carefully, as if waiting to be found. My gloved fingers carefully picked it up. It was a corporate prospectus, a dense legal document, the kind you'd glance at once and then file away. But stapled to it, a small embossed business card. The lettering was stark, minimalist. Viridian Trust and Legal, specializing in international asset management. And beneath that, in smaller print, the precise address. Offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. My gaze sharpened. Why wasn't it scattered with the other papers? Or more importantly, why wasn't it taken? A true robbery gone wrong, a crime of passion, rarely left such neatly packaged clues. This felt off. Too neat. Too pointed. I stood slowly, the crumpled prospectus and business card clutched in my hand. Miller's theory of a robbery or a domestic dispute, initially so plausible, now felt thin, almost transparent. The chaos here was a veneer, a deliberate performance. Julian Thorne's death wasn't a sudden, desperate act. It was a meticulously orchestrated event, and the killer wanted us to see only what they wanted us to see. My work was just beginning, and already I knew I was looking at something far more intricate, far more dangerous than a simple crime. The tension in the room thickened, not from the horror of death, but from the unsettling realization that we were being played. My gaze sharpened, fixed on the scattered documents. Why wasn't it scattered with the other papers, torn or trampled? Instead, it lay almost neatly, like a misplaced bookmark, atop a pile of discarded financial statements. It felt less like an oversight and more like an announcement. "Grant, you got anything for us yet?" The lead detective, a man named Miller, stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, a familiar impatience etched on his face. He'd already made his pronouncements to the press, no doubt. "Looks like a classic domestic, right? Lovers spat gone sideways. Money, jealousy, the usual cocktail." I didn't respond directly. My attention remained on the nuances of the scene. The room itself, usually a bastion of order, was a hurricane of overturned furniture, files ripped from cabinets, and the contents of desk drawers strewn across the polished mahogany floor. Yet, amidst this calculated chaos, the detail of that single document gnawed at me. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the thin material stretching taut over my fingers. "I'm just getting started, Detective. Initial impressions can be misleading." My voice was level, betraying none of the internal churn. Miller grunted, but knew better than to push me further once I was in my zone. I moved methodically, my eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. The air was thick with the faint metallic tang of old blood, layered with the expensive stale scent of the victim's cologne and the acrid note of spilled coffee. The lighting in the room, filtered through heavy drapes, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to swallow details. I made a mental note to request more portable lights. The victim, a man in his late 50s, lay sprawled near the shattered remains of a glass-topped coffee table, He was dressed in a silk robe, expensive and now stained crimson. The initial reports indicated a single, fatal stab wound to the chest. A ornate letter opener, its silver handle glinting dully, lay beside his outstretched hand, a clear and obvious candidate for the murder weapon. The overturned chairs, the scattered papers, the forced entry on the safe. It painted a picture of a violent struggle, a desperate search, or perhaps a perpetrator losing control. But my eyes caught something else. The victim's face, pale and slack, was turned slightly to the left, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at a section of the ornate ceiling. His limbs were splayed, an arm thrown out, a leg bent at an unnatural angle. The position of the body, while indicative of a fall, struck me as too still. Not the contorted, rigid stillness of rigor mortis, which was just beginning to set in, but a peculiar, almost artful arrangement. It lacked the raw, haphazard abandonment that usually accompanies a sudden, violent collapse. It was the stillness of a carefully placed mannequin, not a body that had succumbed to a frenzied attack. I knelt beside him, careful not to disturb anything. My gaze moved to the wound. A single, deep puncture wound directly over the heart. The edges were surprisingly clean, almost surgical, given the crude nature of the letter opener lying nearby. But there were none. His hands, though slightly abraded, showed no deep cuts or gashes that would suggest a struggle against a blade. The fingernails were intact, no torn skin, no embedded fibers from an assailant. I leaned closer, inspecting the wound's periphery. There was minimal tearing of the fabric around the entry point on the robe, far less than I would anticipate from a frantic, uncontrolled thrust. It was almost as if the blade had been guided with precision, slipped between the fibers rather than ripping through them. And the blood spatter around the wound itself, while significant, seemed contained, almost too neat, lacking the wild arterial spray that often accompanies such a severe injury to the torso during a struggle. My brow furrowed. The letter opener was a relatively broad, blunt instrument. While capable of inflicting a fatal wound, the clean, almost narrow entry point seemed at odds with its design. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Only here, the fit was too perfect, too deliberate. "No defensive wounds, Miller," I stated, my voice low without looking up. A pause. "He was caught off guard, Grant. Ambushed." My internal clock was already ticking, the discrepancies piling up. They were minor, yes, subtle almost to the point of invisibility, but they hummed beneath the surface of the obvious, a discordant note in a seemingly harmonious tragedy. This was something else entirely. The cool, sterile air of the forensic examination room wrapped around me like a shroud, a familiar embrace. I moved with practiced economy, shedding my street clothes for the scrubs, mask, and gloves that formed my professional armor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on the stainless steel table where the victim lay. Mr. Davies. His name echoed in my mind, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the lifeless form before me. He was no longer the powerful executive. He was a puzzle, a narrative silenced prematurely. A colleague, the forensic photographer, began her methodical circuit, the click of the shutter punctuating the silence. Each flash illuminated a new angle, capturing the scene before my scalpel irrevocably altered it. I dictated my initial observations into the overhead microphone, my voice steady despite the churn in my gut. Victim, male, Caucasian, estimated age 52. Body temperature reading, 91.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Livor mortis fixed, consistent with supine position. Rigor mortis complete, but beginning to recede in smaller joints. My gloved fingers traced the contours of his jaw, the faint stubble. No abrasions, no contusions on his face or neck. I checked his hands, turning them over, scrutinizing the nails. Clean, unbroken, no defensive wounds, not even the slightest scrape under the cuticles that might suggest a desperate struggle. It was unnerving. A flailing limb, a desperate grab, a struggle for life itself. But here, there was only stillness. I moved to the clothing, meticulously documenting each fold, each minor wrinkle. The expensive suit jacket, the crisp shirt, all undisturbed. No tears, no displaced buttons. It was as if he had simply lain down, perhaps in a deep sleep. And then the fatal blow had been delivered. My attention returned to the single precise wound in the upper chest. It was a puncture, clean-edged, almost surgical in its execution. I measured its length, its width, noted its exact location relative to anatomical landmarks. Wound entry point, 1.2 centimeters in length. Clean margins, located 3 centimeters superior to the sternal notch, 1 centimeter to the left of the midline. I paused, my eyes narrowing, committing the detail to memory. This wasn't the ragged, desperate stab of a lover's rage. The internal examination confirmed my suspicions. The implement had penetrated deep, bypassing bone, slicing through the pericardium and entering the left ventricle of the heart. The internal damage was contained, minimal collateral injury to surrounding tissues. It spoke of absolute precision, a killer who knew anatomy, or at the very least, had practiced. The lack of blood spatter on the clothing or the surrounding scene, as noted by the scene investigators, made more sense now. This wasn't a frenzied attack, it was a targeted strike. Grant, you find anything that confirms the timeline? Miller's voice, gruff and impatient, cut through the quiet hum of the room. He stood in the doorway, a figure of authority in his rumpled suit, his eyes scanning the scene without truly seeing the intricate details I was processing. I straightened, turning to face him. Detective, based on the body temperature and the progression of rigor mortis, I'm leaning toward a time of death slightly later than your initial estimate, perhaps a window of 2 to 3 hours after what was initially proposed. Miller frowned, his brow furrowing. Later? That doesn't fit with the estranged spouse's alibi. He was home by 10:30. Davies expired closer to midnight, perhaps even a little after. I watched his face tighten. More importantly, there are no defensive wounds. None. His hands are clean, his clothing undisturbed. This wasn't a struggle. No struggle? Miller scoffed, stepping further into the room, though he kept a respectful distance from the table. He was stabbed in the heart, Grant. People don't just stand there and let that happen. Precisely my point, I countered, my gaze unwavering. The wound is remarkably precise. It suggests either incapacitation prior to the attack or a killer with an unsettling level of control and skill. This doesn't scream crime of passion to me, detective. It screams premeditation, calculation. Miller ran a hand over his face, a gesture of exasperation. Grant, we have a clear motive, a history of marital discord, and a weapon found near the scene. Don't go chasing ghosts just because a few minutes are off on your clock. A few minutes can change everything, Miller. The one found tucked away in a hidden compartment of the victim's desk, its contents hinting at vast, complicated financial dealings. Far removed from domestic squabbles. The shred bins and locked safes of such an establishment spoke volumes about secrets, not simple rage. This man had more than just a troubled marriage, detective. He had secrets, and I believe those secrets are more relevant than a jealous spouse. Miller merely grunted, shaking his head. Stick to the facts, Grant. Give me a cause and manner of death. The rest is for us to piece together. He turned to leave, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. I watched him go, a familiar tension tightening in my chest. He wanted a simple answer, a clean narrative. But the body on my table, silent and unmoving, was telling a much more intricate story, one that had only just begun to unfold. The inconsistencies were profound, a challenge to the established police theories. My career might be on the line, but the truth was paramount. The real work had just begun. The fluorescent hum of the lab was my only constant companion, a stark contrast to the dismissive grunts of the detective. I, on the other hand, was staring at a world of microscopic inconsistencies, each one a tiny knot threatening to unravel his entire premise. My workbench, usually a sanctuary of precision, felt like a battleground, strewn with slides, tweezers, and a high-powered microscope illuminating secrets the naked eye would never discern. I started with the fibers. Under the lens, they shimmered, synthetic and remarkably fine. I isolated them, carefully transferring each hair-thin filament to a new slide. A preliminary analysis indicated a blend of polyester and an unusual, almost iridescent polymer. It didn't match anything from the victim's home, the alleged perpetrator's known possessions, or even the immediate vicinity of the garden. This wasn't a casual transfer. These fibers felt deliberate, like a signature left by someone unknown, someone who moved with calculated precision. My mind immediately went to the idea of a third party, a phantom presence that had touched the scene. Next, the soil samples. The garden soil was rich, loamy, typical of the affluent community, but the samples meticulously brushed from the victim's shoes and trouser cuffs told a different story. Mixed in were particles of a distinctly sandy, almost volcanic grit, completely alien to the local geology. And then, the pollen. This was the real anomaly, the one that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I had spent hours cross-referencing, comparing against local flora databases, even reaching out to botanical experts. What I found was a type of pollen, a rare species of Erythrina cristagalli, typically found in specific regions of South America. It was beautiful under the scope, a spiky, intricate structure, but utterly out of place in a manicured suburban garden. The implication was stark. The victim had either been somewhere else, or something from that somewhere else had been brought to the scene. The garden, a key element in the detective's narrative, was suddenly irrelevant, a stage dressing. My isolation deepened with each new finding. How could I articulate a gut feeling, however strong, that the scene was manipulated, when the direct evidence pointed to a clear crime of passion? I had a rare pollen and unknown fibers, but no direct link to a different location or a new suspect. It felt like I was assembling a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from 3 different boxes. The lead came from an unexpected source: the victim's meticulously maintained digital calendar, accessed after a court order. A recurring appointment, simply labeled The Account, led me to a specific address. The exterior was unassuming, a facade of polished granite and dark glass, but the air inside was thick with unspoken transactions. I presented my credentials to the receptionist, a woman with an unnervingly serene expression, requesting access to any records pertaining to the victim's appointments. My official request was vague, citing ongoing investigation, a phrase designed to be both authoritative and unrevealing. I watched her carefully as she typed, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. She directed me to a small, private consultation room, offering me a glass of water. While I waited for a partner or a manager to appear, I let my eyes drift. The room was minimalist, modern, adorned with sparse, abstract art, but it was the small details that caught my forensic gaze. On a low table sat a single, elegant vase holding a spray of exotic flowers. They were vibrant, their petals a deep crimson, and though they weren't the Erythrina cristagalli I'd found, their presence here in an environment of strict, almost sterile control felt significant. It was a subtle splash of the unexpected in a place designed for discretion. Then my gaze fell on the floor. The carpet was a tight weave, industrial-grade synthetic, a common choice for high-traffic corporate environments. But I noticed a faint sheen, an almost metallic glint, where the afternoon sun caught the fibers. I knelt, pretending to adjust my shoe, and discreetly scraped a tiny sample into a sterile vial I always carried. The fibers were remarkably similar in texture and composition to the unknown ones I'd found on the victim, though not an exact match. It was enough to make my pulse quicken. The type of polymer, the unusual sheen. It was a lead, however tenuous. A man in a crisp suit, the firm's managing partner, finally entered, his smile practiced and his eyes sharp. He reiterated the firm's commitment to client confidentiality, a polite stonewall. He eventually provided a heavily redacted summary of the victim's engagements, mostly related to asset management and estate planning. Nothing overtly suspicious, nothing that screamed murder motive. But the very act of redaction, the careful omissions, spoke volumes about hidden complexities. The shred bins I'd glimpsed near the reception area, large and industrial, hinted at a constant purge of sensitive information. The locked safes, visible through a partially open door to an inner office, promised secrets held tight. The real killer wasn't just intelligent. They were meticulous, orchestrating a scene designed to mislead, and I was holding the first threads of that elaborate lie. Miller, the lead detective, wanted a simple narrative, a neat package tied with a bow of obvious motive. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I adjusted the focus on the stereo microscope. A tremor born not of fatigue, but of a growing, unsettling certainty. The victim's suit jacket, pristine in its presentation, held a secret. It wasn't the expected blood spatter or fibers from an assailant's clothing. It was a fragment, barely visible even at 200x magnification, of a paper fiber unlike any I'd seen in a domestic setting. It was dense, with a unique watermark pattern, almost metallic in its sheen under polarized light. This wasn't stationary. This was something engineered for security, for discretion. A cold dread tightened around my chest, a familiar sensation. It was the same icy grip that had seized me 5 years ago, a memory I worked tirelessly to bury, yet it clawed its way back with every overlooked detail. The Ellsworth case. A young man, barely out of college, accused of embezzlement. The prosecution's case had been circumstantial, but compelling. My report, focused on the digital forensics, had missed a physical anomaly, a specific brand of ink used only by a niche printing house on a single crucial document. I'd dismissed it as an irrelevant trace, a smudge. It hadn't fit the narrative. The conviction stood. The man served 3 years before a new piece of evidence, uncovered by an independent investigator, linked that ink to an entirely different, far more sophisticated fraud network. The young man was exonerated, but the damage was done. My oversight, however small, had cost him years. That failure, that gnawing regret, fueled my current obsession. I wouldn't miss another detail. Not again. My research assistant, Lena, approached my workstation, her shadow falling across the illuminated sample. Her brow was furrowed, a silent question in her eyes. "Grant," she began, her voice soft. "You've been at this for 18 hours straight. You need to rest." I didn't look up. "This fiber, Lena, it's not right. It's high-grade security paper. Not something you'd find at a typical crime scene, especially not on a victim whose primary residence was a suburban mansion." My voice was raspy, strained. "Could be anything," she offered gently, though I detected a hint of concern in her tone. "A receipt, a bill, a forgotten memo." "No," I countered, finally tearing my gaze from the eyepiece to meet hers. My eyes were bloodshot, my jaw tight. The weave, the luminescence. This is purpose-built. Think legal documents, financial instruments, something meant to be untraceable or at least difficult to replicate. She sighed, a quiet exhalation that spoke of her growing exasperation with my single-mindedness. Our professional relationship, once a seamless collaboration, was now a tightrope walk. My intensity pushed her, but it also wore her down. I knew I was being difficult, probably unreasonable, but the stakes felt too high. My personal life had receded into the background, a distant hum I no longer registered. Missed calls from family, unopened emails, they piled up, ignored. Everything was secondary to the truth hiding in plain sight. The detective's voice, when he finally called, was predictably laced with impatience. Marcus, anything solid? We're ready to close this out. Motive is clear. The suspect's alibi is crumbling. Solid? I have inconsistencies, detective, I stated, my voice firm despite the fatigue. Microscopic evidence suggests a level of planning far beyond a simple crime of passion. The scene was staged. I'm looking at traces of high-security paper on the victim's clothing that don't belong. A grunt of disbelief echoed through the phone line. Paper? You're chasing paper when we have a viable suspect and a motive that screams jealousy? Stick to the blood and guts, Marcus. Leave the paperwork to us. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at the dead phone, the familiar brick wall of official resistance. That dismissal only solidified my resolve. If they wouldn't look, I would. I spent the next few hours cross-referencing databases, not for DNA or ballistics, but for specialized paper manufacturers, for security features, for unique watermarks. The search was arduous, a needle in a haystack of global commerce. But then, a hit. A specific paper type, its unique fiber structure and embedded microdots matching my sample, was predominantly used by a select group of international legal firms specializing in offshore asset management and complex corporate structures. The trail, faint but undeniable, led directly to a particular entity. It stood apart from the glass towers, a fortress of discretion. My official credentials wouldn't get me past the ground floor security, not for a paper trail that the detective considered irrelevant. So I improvised. I staked out the building from my unmarked vehicle, watching. The morning light began to bleed across the skyline, painting the windows in hues of gray and orange. Around 6 a.m., a cleaning crew arrived, their industrial-grade shredder being wheeled in through a service entrance. My gut tightened. Excessive shredding, especially at this hour, was a red flag. I watched as large, opaque bins were brought out, filled to the brim with shredded documents awaiting collection. As the crew pushed the bins towards the designated pickup zone, one of the bins, overloaded, snagged on a loose paving stone. The cleaning supervisor, a harried individual, barked orders, and the crew scrambled to scoop up the mess. But in their haste, a few fragments, tiny slivers of the meticulously destroyed documents, escaped their grasp, carried by a faint breeze towards a nearby storm drain. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was my chance. Waiting until the crew had moved on, I emerged from my car, feigning a dropped phone, casually making my way to the storm drain. My eyes scanned the ground, my forensic training kicking in, filtering out the urban detritus. And there it was. A sliver, no bigger than my thumbnail, nestled against the metal grate. It was a fragment of the same high-security paper, its watermark unmistakable. But more importantly, it bore a partial imprint of a company logo, half obscured, but undeniably a stylized C, interwoven with an X. I carefully retrieved the fragment, my fingers trembling with a mix of triumph and unease. This wasn't just paper. This was a direct link. The game had just escalated. The dead phone in my hand felt heavier than usual, a physical manifestation of the stone settling in my gut. Blood and guts, the detective had sneered. As if the human body was a simple canvas and not a complex tapestry of every interaction, every environment, every microscopic transfer. His dismissal of the paper trail, of anything beyond the obvious, was a familiar wall I'd slammed against too many times. But this case, this meticulously staged scene, demanded more than easy answers. It demanded a forensic deep dive, a relentless pursuit of the invisible. Frustration simmered, a low burn beneath my professional composure. I strode back through the quiet corridors of the forensic facility, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long, stark shadows. The main evidence room, a climate-controlled vault of other people's tragedies, beckoned. Every item within its confines held a story. If only you knew how to listen. I bypassed the larger items, the clothing, the furniture fragments. My gaze settled on the victim's personal effects, neatly cataloged and sealed in clear bags on a steel shelf. I pulled out the bag containing the victim's watch. A luxury timepiece, understated but undeniably expensive. Its polished steel bezel gleamed under the overhead lights. I remembered examining it initially, noting the faint, almost imperceptible scratch marring its surface near the 6 o'clock mark. At the time, I'd logged it as incidental, a common wear and tear mark on an item worn daily. Now, with the detective's dismissive words echoing and the nagging feeling that nothing in this case was truly incidental, I saw it differently. That scratch wasn't just a scratch. It was a microscopic canyon, a potential repository of crucial information. I carefully removed the watch from its bag, handling it with gloved hands. I carried it to my workbench, positioning it under the high magnification stereo microscope. The scratch, barely visible to the naked eye, transformed into a miniature landscape of jagged edges and shadowed depressions under the intense light. Within its narrow trench, minute flecks of foreign material glinted. Not skin, not fabric, not environmental dust. Something else. I loaded the watch into the chamber of the Raman spectrometer, the specialized equipment whirring to life. The air in the lab grew taut with anticipation, a silent hum of advanced technology waiting to unveil secrets. I initiated the scan, the focused laser beam dancing across the tiny gouge. Each photon that returned to the detector carried a spectral fingerprint, a unique signature of the chemical bonds within the material it had struck. My eyes fixed on the monitor, watching the real-time graph build, peak by peak. The initial readings were consistent with the watch's alloy, the victim's epidermal cells, and common atmospheric particulates. Then, as the laser probed deeper into the scratch, a new, anomalous peak began to emerge. It was subtle at first, a gentle rise, then it sharpened, solidifying into a distinct, undeniable signal on the spectral graph. This wasn't a random anomaly. This was a composite, a blend of complex polymers interwoven with a rare earth element, utterly out of place on a wristwatch. The signature was precise, stark, and unlike anything I had encountered in a domestic setting. I ran the scan again, then a third time, meticulously adjusting the focus, ensuring the data was robust. Each run confirmed the same result. The spectral fingerprint was consistent, pointing to a highly specialized material. My mind raced, sifting through databases of industrial compounds, obscure alloys, and advanced composites. This wasn't something you'd find in a typical home, or even a high-end office. The profile of the residue suggested industrial-grade precision, materials designed for extreme durability or very specific functions. It wasn't the residue of a struggle, nor a casual accident. This was residue from a tool, or an environment, engineered for a purpose. My internal thoughts gravitated towards the victim's profession, their affluent connections, the world of high finance where meticulous operations and advanced security were paramount. Where did such worlds intersect with such specialized equipment? The crime of passion theory, the easy narrative of jealousy and rage, crumbled further in the face of this microscopic truth. It suggested an environment where such materials were commonplace, where highly specialized tools might be used regularly. Then a thought clicked into place, a sudden jolt of recognition. Affluent, high finance, sensitive materials, precision tools. My mind conjured an image, a phrase I'd encountered in the periphery of the victim's financial records. Something about offshore dealings. That phrase, pulled from a fleeting thought, solidified. Secure, precise, handling sensitive documents. The type of place that might utilize advanced, specialized equipment, perhaps even industrial-grade shredders or data destruction tools that could leave such a unique signature. It was a leap, a significant one, from a microscopic scratch to an entire geographical and professional sector. But it was a calculated leap, fueled by the sheer incongruity of the finding. The victim's watch, once a symbol of their status, now held the microscopic key to a hidden world, a trail leading far beyond the initial convenient narrative. I had my new angle. and it pointed directly to where the paper, the real paper, was likely being destroyed. His dismissive tone still grated, a dull ache behind my eyes. But the inconsistencies I'd found weren't fading. They were deepening, like stains on porous rock. My internal monologue was interrupted by a call from a junior analyst, his voice tight with a newfound excitement. "Grant, we've got something. A former employee of the victim's firm, name's Davies. Apparently he was let go 6 months ago under less than amicable circumstances. Big severance package, but a bitter taste. He's got a flimsy alibi for the night of the murder. Claimed he was alone at home, no witnesses. A disgruntled ex-employee. It was the kind of neat, tidy package the detective would devour. Too neat, perhaps. My mind immediately flagged it as a potential red herring. The killer I envisioned, the one who meticulously staged the scene, wouldn't leave such an obvious trail, not without a purpose. This Davies, if he was indeed involved, felt like a pawn, or worse, a deliberate distraction. His financial records showed a substantial payout, but also a rapid decline in subsequent earnings. The motive was clear, if simplistic. The alibi was a gaping hole. It fit the detective's narrative perfectly, which meant it probably didn't fit mine. I decided to start with the source of his employment, the victim's firm. The building itself was a brutalist block of gray concrete and smoked glass, a fortress designed to repel scrutiny. I informed a colleague of my destination, a simple courtesy, and set out. The receptionist, a woman with an unnervingly serene expression, directed me to the archives department after a brief, frosty exchange. "Mr. Davies's employment records," I stated, flashing my credentials. "Standard procedure for a high-profile case." She seemed to weigh my words, then nodded, gesturing towards a narrow hallway. "Third door on the left. The records custodian will assist you." The archives were a maze of filing cabinets and heavy fireproof doors. The air was dry and smelled faintly of old paper and dust. The records custodian, a man with thick spectacles perched on his nose, seemed agitated by my presence. He pulled a thick folder, yellowed with age, from a locked cabinet. "Davies," he mumbled, pushing it across the table. "Difficult man, caused a lot of trouble." I scanned the documents, looking for anything beyond the obvious. Performance reviews, disciplinary actions, correspondence. Nothing screamed mastermind killer. It was all standard corporate drama. As I flipped through a stack of termination papers, a sudden jarring clang echoed from the far end of the archive. A heavy steel shelving unit laden with binders shuddered violently. I looked up, my gaze locking onto the top shelf, where a loose binder teetered precariously. My forensic instincts, honed by years of analyzing impact and trajectory, screamed danger. This wasn't a natural shift. The custodian, startled, dropped his pen. I didn't hesitate. "Down!" I yelled, shoving him hard, sending his chair skidding. I threw myself to the side, rolling under a sturdy metal desk just as the entire shelving unit, groaning under its immense weight, toppled forward. The crash was deafening, a cascade of metal and paper and shattered plastic. Dust erupted, filling the air, stinging my eyes. The desk rattled violently, a shield against the collapsing chaos. My ears rang. When the din finally subsided, I pushed myself up, my muscles coiled, adrenaline coursing through me. The records custodian lay sprawled on the floor, dazed but seemingly unhurt, buried under a light shower of papers. I surveyed the destruction. The shelving unit lay twisted and broken, a testament to the force of its fall. A quick glance revealed the topmost bolt, meant to secure it to the wall, had been deliberately loosened, its threads stripped. This was no accident. This was an attempt. My breath hitched. They knew I was here. The killer wasn't just intelligent. They were actively monitoring the investigation, anticipating our moves and laying traps. Davies wasn't the killer. He was the bait. This entire lead, this seemingly convenient narrative, was a meticulously crafted diversion designed to lure me into a fatal accident. I stood amidst the wreckage, the acrid smell of ozone and pulverized paper filling my nostrils. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cold, precise rage. The detective had scoffed at my complexities. But this calculated attempt on my life proved my suspicions correct. The killer wasn't a hot-headed amateur. They were a ghost in the machine, watching, waiting, and now actively striking back. The game had just escalated, and I was no longer just an observer. I was a target. The acrid smell of ozone still clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of the near miss. My hands, though steady now, remembered the tremor. But the calculated attempt on my life, the explosive confirmation of a mind far more intricate than anyone had suspected, had solidified my resolve. This wasn't just a murder. It was a deliberate, meticulously crafted deception. And the killer wasn't just intelligent. They were watching me. I drove across town, the city lights blurring into streaks of white and red. The building was a monolith of dark glass and steel, silent in the late hour. Inside, the hushed corridors echoed with my footsteps. A junior associate, pale and clearly unwilling to be here, pointed me towards a conference room, its table laden with files pertaining to the victim's complex financial dealings. Around the room, industrial shred bins stood like sentinels, and several heavy-duty safes were built into the walls, their chrome glinting under the recessed lighting. The air smelled of old paper and the faint metallic tang of ozone from a nearby shredder, still warm from recent use. I was sifting through a stack of quarterly reports, trying to make sense of the victim's labyrinthine investments, when my secure line buzzed. It was Lena. "Grant," she began, her voice tight with a suppressed excitement that resonated through the static. "You were right about the watch. The residue wasn't just a trace. It was a signature." I leaned against the conference table, the edge of a thick binder digging into my hip. "What did you find?" "It's a polymer, unlike anything standard. Highly specialized, designed for extreme durability and biocompatibility. We traced its specific molecular structure. There are only a handful of places in the world that even synthesize this compound. One in particular stands out, a high-tech research facility upstate, primarily focused on advanced prosthetics and surgical tools, cutting-edge stuff, not widely commercialized yet." A cold clarity washed over me. Prosthetics, surgical tools. The pieces began to snap into place with a terrifying precision. "The scratch on the watch," I murmured, more to myself than to Lena. It wasn't just a struggle, it was intentional, a marker. A very specific marker, Grant. The unnatural stillness I'd noted, the almost serene repose despite the violence. It hadn't been shock or a struggle that ended abruptly. It was something else entirely. "Lena," I said, my voice low, "rerun the toxicology on the victim's tissue. Look for anything, however minute, that might suppress motor function or pain receptors. And the wound, the precise wound, it wasn't just clean, it was surgical." I could almost hear Lena's frantic typing on the other end. "I'm on it. I'll focus on the more obscure compounds, the ones not typically screened for in a standard panel." While she worked, I pushed away from the table, my gaze sweeping across the meticulously organized files and the ominous shred bins. This office, a nexus of financial secrets, felt suddenly connected to the sterile world of high-tech research. An hour later, Lena called back, her voice breathless. "Grant, you won't believe this. We found it. A trace amount of a rare sedative. A non-barbiturate, non-benzodiazepine compound, incredibly potent, designed for rapid induction and short duration. It would have rendered the victim completely immobile, yet fully conscious, within seconds. It's not available to the public. Only a select few research labs and advanced medical facilities even have access to it." My stomach tightened into a knot. Fully conscious. Immobile. The horror of that thought was immense. And the facility where the polymer is synthesized? The same one. They're involved in clinical trials for this exact sedative, used in conjunction with precision surgeries. The pieces weren't just snapping, they were slamming into place. The victim hadn't fought back because they couldn't. The passion was a theatrical performance. The killer had rendered them utterly helpless, then inflicted the precise wound with the skill of a surgeon, not a frenzied lover. The watch scratch, the chemical residue. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, almost arrogant calling card. The killer hadn't merely committed murder. They had orchestrated a macabre puppet show. They possessed not just the means, but the specialized knowledge and the specific tools from that high-tech research facility. They had used their professional expertise, their surgical precision, their access to rare sedatives to manipulate the scene, to make the murder look like something it wasn't. And they had underestimated one thing: my refusal to accept the easy answer. The sterile hum of the air conditioning was the only sound for a long moment after I finished. The detective sat across from me, his face a mask of careful neutrality. I could feel the weight of my words, the sheer audacity of what I was suggesting, hanging in the air between us. My hands, still tingling from the adrenaline of discovery, rested on the stack of evidence photos and my meticulously detailed notes. So, the detective finally broke the silence, his voice low. "You're telling me the entire scene, everything we saw, was a lie, a performance?" "Not just a performance," I clarified, leaning forward slightly, "a masterpiece of misdirection. The victim was rendered unconscious, completely helpless, before the wound was inflicted. Professional grade. It's surgical. The angle, the depth, the complete absence of hesitation marks it speaks of an intimate knowledge of anatomy, a steady hand, and absolute control. This wasn't a lover's rage. It was a professional execution disguised as one." The detective picked up one of my reports, scanning the dense paragraphs. "A surgeon," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "That's what you're implying." "Not just implying," I corrected, my voice firm. "I'm stating it. The technique, the access to such a specific sedative, the psychological profile of someone capable of such a cold, calculated staging, it narrows the field considerably. We're looking for someone brilliant, methodical, and utterly without remorse." We spent the next hour sifting through the victim's life, not for obvious enemies or jilted lovers, but for hidden connections. My mind raced, connecting the dots I'd laid out with the detective's existing knowledge base. Who had access to the victim's private life, their home, without raising alarm? It was the detective who finally pulled up a name, his finger tracing a line on his tablet. There was a professional connection, a silent partner in one of the victim's less savory investment schemes. A respected surgeon, actually. Dr. Elias Thorne. Always kept his distance from the public eye on this particular venture. Thorne. A highly regarded figure, beyond reproach. The perfect mask. My gut clenched. This wasn't just a suspect. This was the ghost in the machine. The puppet master. The hidden connection was a financial one, deeply buried, threatening to expose a reputable career. The passion was a cover for calculated greed and self-preservation. The sedative, the surgical precision, I reiterated, it fits. The detective nodded slowly, his initial skepticism replaced by a grim determination. "All right, Grant, this changes everything. We move on, Thorne." He stood, grabbing his coat. He's been elusive since the initial interviews. Claimed to be out of town, then back, then busy. The pieces weren't just snapping, they were slamming into place. That's not elusiveness, that's evasion. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull thud, not from fear, but from the sudden, profound shift in the investigation. The detective was already on his radio, his voice sharp, issuing commands. The quiet room erupted into a flurry of urgent activity. Units were dispatched, warrants prepared. The hunt was on. I imagined Thorne, brilliant and calculating, aware that the net was tightening. He wouldn't just sit and wait. He would have prepared. A few minutes later, the detective's voice crackled through my radio, urgent and strained. "Grant, we've got a lead. Thorne's primary offshore financial dealings, the ones connected to the victim's investments. Our intelligence suggests he maintains an office for those dealings. The building security reported a hasty departure less than an hour ago. They found fresh paper residue in the shred bins, and one of the safes had been recently accessed and wiped clean. He wasn't just one step ahead. He was always thinking, always planning. The meticulous nature I'd observed in the crime scene extended to his escape. We're chasing a ghost." I stared at the photos of the staged crime scene, the precise wound, the subtle chemical residue. Thorne was a man who left nothing to chance, who understood the power of deception. He had orchestrated a murder, then meticulously covered his tracks, anticipating every move. The chase had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. My forensic insights had led me down a winding path, one that ended not in a dimly lit alley or a forgotten storage unit, but at a structure of cold, imposing glass and steel. This was the address Thorne had used for his shell corporations, the phantom entities that masked his true financial movements. It was an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes, a fortress built for secrets. The air, even in this insulated environment, felt charged, heavy with unspoken truths. I pushed through the revolving door, the hushed lobby eerily quiet for a place designed to handle high-stakes transactions. A uniformed security guard, his eyes distant, barely registered my presence. Thorne, I knew, wouldn't be in the main reception. He would be deeper, behind layers of access and discretion. My intel, gleaned from an anonymous tip I'd cultivated through a network of contacts over years, pointed to a private executive suite on the top floor. The elevator ride felt interminable, the polished brass reflecting my own taut reflection. My jaw was tight, a dull ache beginning behind my eyes. This was it, the culmination of weeks of relentless pursuit, of challenging assumptions, of staring down the established order. The suite door was a heavy slab of dark wood, unmarked. No nameplate, no company logo. Just a small, almost invisible electronic lock. I produced the access card I'd acquired, a replica painstakingly created from a discarded one found near Thorne's last known vehicle. The light on the panel flickered green, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. He was there, as I knew he would be. Thorne stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the distant city skyline, a pristine, almost sterile office spread behind him. He didn't turn immediately, as if sensing my presence, but choosing to acknowledge it on his own terms. His composure was unnerving. "Grant Marcus," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of surprise, finally turning. His eyes, though, held a flicker, a recognition of the inevitable. "I expected you. Though I admit, I thought you'd be slower." "You underestimated the evidence, Thorne," I replied, stepping further into the room, letting the door close softly behind me. My gaze swept the office. A large, empty shred bin stood beside a gleaming desk, its contents recently emptied. A bank of locked safes built into the wall gleamed dully. This was where the real work, the real destruction happened. "Evidence is subjective, Grant, a matter of interpretation." He gestured to a minimalist chair. "Care for a seat? We can discuss my interpretation." I remained standing. "No, we'll discuss yours, then mine. You planned the murder of the executive with exquisite detail. The scene was designed to scream crime of passion. The overturned lamp, the scattered papers, the single, precise wound." Thorne's smile was thin. "Effective, wouldn't you say? The initial assessment was quite conclusive." "Almost too conclusive," I countered, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through me. "That wound, a single deep incision perfectly placed. It wasn't a frenzied attack. It was surgical, Thorne, too clean for a lover's rage. And then there was the residue. He raised an eyebrow, a subtle shift in his otherwise calm demeanor. Residue. A unique cleaning agent, Thorne. A specialized solvent designed to break down organic material without leaving a trace on most surfaces. But it left a faint spectroscopic signature on the victim's clothing near the wound and a barely perceptible sheen on the edge of the blade, which was later found in the park. I took a step closer. It was a signature you didn't intend to leave. A chemical fingerprint, unique to a specific industrial application. An application, I discovered, you had exclusive access to through a subsidiary company. His composure wavered, just for a fraction of a second. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Impressive, Marcus. Most would have missed that. Most aren't looking for what isn't there, Thorne. The absence of typical struggle marks, the carefully arranged disarray. It was a stage play. But the solvent, that was your undoing. You're brilliant, but you're also meticulous. You left no room for accident, and that, ironically, is what made the accident obvious. He let out a soft, humorless chuckle. So, my perfection was my flaw. He turned back to the window, his gaze sweeping the sprawling metropolis below. You want the truth, Grant? The messy, inconvenient truth that unravels carefully constructed narratives? I want the truth that justice demands. Thorne finally turned, his expression now stripped of all pretense. The executive was a liability. He was about to expose a massive corporate espionage operation, one I've been orchestrating for years. Proprietary data, market strategies, R&D breakthroughs, all rerouted, redirected. The profits were substantial. His eyes glinted with a disturbing pride. He got greedy, threatened to go public. He thought he had leverage. This wasn't about revenge or a quick payout. This was about power, absolute and unyielding. So you eliminated him to protect your operation. Precisely. A simple, elegant solution. Frame it as a lover's quarrel. Let the police pursue the obvious. This entire offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes was my contingency, my exit strategy. He had seen the executive not as a human being, but as a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied. Not perfect enough, Thorne, I said, my voice firm, the adrenaline now morphing into a quiet resolve. You left a signature, and I read it. Not perfect enough, Thorne, I had said, the words a low, guttural exhalation that cut through the sudden silence of the interrogation room. His eyes, for the first time, had flickered with something beyond pure calculation. A hint of wounded pride, perhaps. The confession, once it began, had been a torrent, a meticulous narrative of motive, planning, and execution, delivered with an almost academic detachment. And he had done it with the cold, precise hand of a master craftsman, until my hands had found the flaws in his intricate design. The apprehension was swift, almost anticlimactic after the psychological chess match that had preceded it. Uniformed officers moved in, the clink of steel an abrupt punctuation mark to Thorne's monologue. I watched him being led away, his posture still rigid, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the pale walls, perhaps already dissecting his own missteps. The days that followed blurred into a focused whirlwind of corroboration. Thorne's confession, detailed as it was, still needed to be aligned with every minute forensic detail I had uncovered. The investigative team, now fully on board with my initial theories, worked tirelessly. We spent an entire day sifting through the remnants of Thorne's digital life, and then, armed with new warrants derived from his statements, the real legwork began. This led us directly to an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes, a place Thorne had used to manage the executive's more illicit financial dealings. And, as it turned out, to hide some of his own operational funds for the elaborate staging. I remember the stale air of that office, the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in the shafts of artificial light. The shred bins were overflowing, a testament to Thorne's last-ditch efforts to erase his tracks. But the locked safes yielded the truly damning evidence. ledger books, encrypted hard drives, and a series of meticulously planned flowcharts detailing the executive's eventual downfall, all designed to look like a crime of passion. The precision, even in his attempts to cover up the cover-up, was staggering. It confirmed everything I had deduced from the blood spatter and the subtle inconsistencies in the assumed weapon. The trial was a protracted affair, a testament to the legal gymnastics Thorne's defense team attempted. But the evidence, built brick by painstaking brick, was unassailable. My testimony, detailing the precise angle of the wound, the unusual pattern of the impact, the absence of specific trace evidence that should have been present in a struggle, stood firm against every cross-examination. I explained how the crime of passion narrative was a carefully constructed illusion, a performance designed to mislead. I presented the microabrasions on the victim's skin, not from a struggle, but from the specific material of a restraint, subtly placed and then removed. The jury, I could see, followed every line, every detail, their faces a canvas of dawning comprehension. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was the vindication of method, the confirmation that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked details hold the biggest truths. The relief, however, was immense, a heavy burden finally lifted from my shoulders. The intellectual challenge had been exhilarating, a complex puzzle that pushed me to the edge of my capabilities. I poured myself a single amber-hued drink, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The city lights twinkled outside my window, indifferent to the justice that had been served. I thought about the executive, his life abruptly and cruelly extinguished. A pawn in a game of calculated ambition. I thought about Thorne, a man whose intellect, twisted and devoid of empathy, had crafted a perfect lie. The case had taken its toll, the relentless pursuit of truth leaving me drained, but it had also sharpened my focus. It reaffirmed my purpose. My work wasn't just about identifying the cause of death. It was about speaking for those who could no longer speak, about peeling back layers of deception to reveal the stark, uncomfortable truth. It was a commitment I felt more deeply than ever. Later, the quiet click of my front door announced Lena's arrival. She found me by the window, lost in thought. She didn't speak, simply moved to stand beside me, her presence a warm, comforting anchor. She understood, without words, the weight of what I carried. I felt her hand slip into mine, her fingers intertwining with mine, a silent affirmation of our shared journey. The world outside was still complex, still full of hidden dangers. But with Lena by my side and a renewed resolve in my heart, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The smallest details, after all, were often the most profound.